This morning, we have our very own Loughlin Tatem, and he will share his poem, Temporary Insanity, with us.
At 7 from work. He said, "You finished working at 6." But before she could give him an explanation, he clenched his fist and was licks. She heard the car coming and she slammed down before without even saying she gone. And he swear when she comes, she gonna get so much blows that she's sorry she ever was born. The door opened slowly. He turned around. "Where you went, girl?" He was angry. His fury was rising. She expected his hand, but she didn't expect his knee. She rolled on the floor, and she crying, and screaming, and crying, and swore, and he fuming, and sweating, and thumping, and she couldn't take it anymore. Her eyes were swollen and watery, red. She laid in the dark on the bed. She lost her mind. Her eyes were all swollen and watery red. He laid on the dark in the bed. She lost her mind and drifted away. And when she came back, the sheets were all red. The man lying there was dead.
And we're back here on Good Morning SKN with national poet, Mr. Loughlin Tatem, for today's expression. Mr. Tatem, thank you so very much for joining us on our very first episode of Good Morning SKN.
Good morning. Good morning to you, Jamie, and listening audience, and it's good to be here.
Definitely good to have you. I was listening to you in our previous segment talk about things that are topical, the emotion that went into the licks that you were talking about, domestic violence, etc. I was sitting there enthralled by your performance to the point where I almost felt the blows that you were talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And so I want to know, since I've known you for so long, can you give me and our viewers a better sense of your creative process and what inspires you to write the way that you do?
Well, I see poetry in everything. I tend not to miss anything. I see, for example, I was just in the studio out there, and I was looking at the photograph of the butterfly. And the butterfly has some little dots and little circles around it. Somebody thought of that. The circles and the butterfly, the color, nothing came by accident. So there's poetry in everything. There's poetry in the way people walk, in the way they talk, in the way you live your life. I see poetry everywhere.
For every artist. So you basically get inspiration from anything that you
Anything that moves, anything that is, anything that exists, anything that happened.
So on that note, we are actually in the 16 days of activism against domestic violence. So your poem is actually quite timely. Was that the inspiration for this particular thing? You've observed issues of domestic violence, perhaps not personally, but in our society?
Yeah, well, fortunately, I have not personally witnessed any domestic violence, at least not in my home, but I'm aware that it happens. And I think it's terrible. I wonder sometimes what we may be able to do to prevent it, to stop it, to eliminate it, to reduce it, because it's damaging. When a young lady, because when I normally, very, very often, the recipients of domestic violence, they say it damages them. It damages their body parts, their hands. They can't go to work. They can't do the domestic activities that they would normally do. And even if they do it, it's not a pleasure. It's not a joy. It's painful.
It's laborious.
And yet still you expect them to perform at their optimum, at their best. So, for these reasons, these are the kind of things that concern me. And I do my best to make people aware of it, whether it's through poetry, whether it's through writing books, whatever abilities I have, I try to bring these things to the fore, to people's consciousness.